Okay, now we have understood the agenda for the course. Now before we start writing the first iOS application, we need to know what is Objective-C. So this session is bit of theory. We will be covering few important concepts about the Objective-C like properties, protocols, class methods, and the most important auto release. And for all this topic, we will be drafting some golden rules so that it becomes easier. Once you've understood this golden rule, the same thing will be repeated throughout the course content with practical aspects. So we'll be seeing these golden rules apply to the various design pattern used in the iOS application. So just be relaxed. Okay, now before we start seeing the syntax and all, we just discuss the few points with respect to the Apple. When you see Apple products like the iPod or the iPhone or the MacBooks or the iMac, they are nothing called innovative products. Such type of products do exist before they were launched, but the way Apple fascinates us is that by its user experience. So when you see this product, you say wow. That wow factor is the main USP of the Apple. So when you create the application which will run on the iPhone or the iPad devices or iOS devices, I would say, you need to make sure that user experience should be the most important feature of your software. If the user experience is not flawless, you're gonna get negative reviews. So the most important point you have to start thinking right from now before you start even developing your apps is user experience cannot be negotiated at any damn cost. 95% of rejection are purely based on user experience. So Apple main USP is user experience. Second, as we know, Apple are not at all innovative, they are more perfectionist. So the Objective-C, which was developed when Steve was thrown out of the Apple and formed the next step, the Objective-C language was created in that company. Therefore, you'll see everything is prefixed by NS, which indicates next step. Now, Objective-C is built on the C. Okay, it's an object-oriented C. So it has the memory management concept coming from C++, like the pointers, which gives you more control on your memory. But the way the code needs to be written, the way the concept of interface or the multiple inheritance not allowed comes from the Java background. So it's a mixture of both Java style of coding, whereas memory management control at the level of C++. So if you know C++ and Java, a faint knowledge, you will see how Objective-C takes the benefit of both, making the coding style simple as Java and giving you more fine control on your memory using C++ C concept. So it's purely based on C. Okay, so before you get hesitate, you want to learn, I want to learn new language. Trust me, Objective-C is not at all a new language. It's just a bit different. Okay, now to start off with my session, I'll just open some text field. So this becomes my board for you guys to. So I'll be writing a lot of stuff on this whiteboard. Okay, now we'll take an example to build up a discussion. So we take an example of say class vehicle, because whenever I take a session, 75% of the time people say vehicle as a use case. Now a vehicle might have a model number. It will have, so I'm starting with the camel casing, small letter and then camel casing. It will have string, say name. So in Java you don't have to put pointer. If it's C++, you have to put pointer. So this is the way you have created a class called vehicle, which has two variables, or I would say two state. One is model number, which is a primitive type, and a name, which is a composite data structure. Okay, now suppose you want to create this class for your iOS application. The ID you use for creating the application for the iOS device or for the Macintosh device is called Xcode. Now Xcode is the only one IDE available for the Macintosh platform to produce. Apple have a strong developer agreement. Any application published without Xcode won't be accepted by the Apple ecosystem. So even if you use third-party tool like Sencha or whatever, they create a project. That project needs to be imported in your Xcode template, or they generate the Xcode template for you automatically and then say publish. So Xcode is very important for Apple. Xcode as an IDE, I have seen the first version and I'm seeing the fifth version. It's grown very nicely. But if you compare with the Microsoft Visual Studio or the Eclipse, which are there since a decade and more, it's still a child in front of them. So Xcode has been growing very fast. It's it's becoming a very popular IDE. Yeah, but if you are an experienced industrialist programmer who have been using who has been doing programming since a decade, you will still find it's not up to the level IDE. But trust me, it is a great IDE. It's growing up very fast. So I will go to the Xcode. I'll tell him the Xcode to create a class for me. Now, like Java, each class is called a Java class if it's inherited from the object class. You don't have to mention that it extends object, it's internally extending the object. Similarly, every class is called an Objective-C class if its root class is NS object. So it follows factory design pattern. So you can imagine there is a God class called NS object which is producing all the class. All Objective-C classes are derived from NS object. Then only they are called. If you create a class which is not extending NS object, it's called rival to that NS object. Then you have to define every library which we get free of cost, the design patterns and everything on your own. So I will go to Xcode. I'll say I want to create a vehicle. Now Xcode will create two physical files, .h and vehicle.m. So each class in an Objective-C is physically divided into two files. One is called header file, or you can call interface file. Now here the interface term is meant for the header file. Interface term in Java means a callback mechanism, right? And another file is called as implementation file. So the one which is a .h is interface file or the header file, and one which is .m is the implementation file. Now why there is a split between the two files? Why the class gets split between the two files? Now in terms of C++, every class should be divided into two physical files is a best practice. Now in Apple, what they have done, they have made it compulsion. Your class will be divided into two physical files. The header file will declare all your variables, or you can say state of the class, all your methods which are behavior of your class, which your object will perform. And implementation file will contain only the implementation of the methods which are declared in your .h. Now with this, what happens if you suppose you want to sell your code, you want to make your code reusable like an SDK. So .h becomes publicly available file, whereas all the .m will get compiled into one package which won't be decodable. So you can preserve your code and share your code without getting leaked. So that's the best part of making a class into physical files. Okay. Now second benefit which I think, we always plan a class inside the .h. We'll see what a class can perform, what variable it can have, the object of the class obviously, And when to roll back from the .h is very simple. Sometimes what happens, people start implementing the code, and then when they stuck, they have to roll back the entire algorithm, and that's very time consuming. So if you want to perform the software lifecycle properly with the minimum time, we do planning in .h, execution in .m. So we first plan all the .h, we get the entire class diagram ready, and once it get approved, we start implementing the code. So execution comes after the planning. Now this is what, now how typically vehicle.h will look like. So vehicle.h, we're going to have first any file you create in the Objective-C, you will find one framework called UIKit slash UIKit.h import. Now it's called user interface kit. When we were discussing about the Objective-C, we told the main USP of the Apple guys is a user interaction, the user interface, the user experience. So by default, whichever class you create, the import of UIKit will always be there. Now, depending upon the type of class you have told the Xcode to produce, following imports will happen. Then there will be an annotation called @interface, which indicates it's an interface file, start of the interface file, followed by the name of the class. So in our case, it's vehicle colon immediate superclass. So if suppose you have not mentioned any superclass, then by default it should be NS object. If you say vehicle extends moving objects, then vehicle colon moving object would be the signature, but moving object should extend NS object. So the root class should be always NS object. Then inside the curly braces, we declare the state of an object, or in simple terms, member variable declaration. So as part of this discussion is concerned, we're gonna create int model number, NS string, NS stand for next step, I'd say name. Now I just save this file so that we come to outside the curly braces, we're going to declare the behavior of an object, or in simple term, member methods. Now we are not seeing the signature right now, the syntax, because once we do this, we're going to move to the syntax, and then we're going to say @ indicates end of the .h. So .h starts with hash import, ends with, so imports are just a pre-compiler, then it starts with @interface followed by the class name colon extending the superclass @end. Now the .m, vehicle.m will have first import vehicle.h, then it's going to have an annotation called @implementation followed by the class name. And now it will have method 1, which was declared, open braces, close braces. So all your methods which are declared will be implemented here. Method 2, whatever is the signature, you want to say, and @end indicates end of the file. Now if you notice, you just import only one file, because for the compiler and a linker, there are two physical files, right? They have to import them, link them to make an object file. So all your inputs happen here because it's a publicly visible file. With one import, everything comes to the, and then the object file gets created. You don't need to mention the superclass name in implementation. It's already mentioned in your .h. If you notice, the system files are imported in angle bracket, whereas the third party files are imported using double quote. So if you have an error saying this file not found, that means the library is not found. You have to import using the Xcode. If you get an error saying this file not found, which is in double quote, that means Your third party file is not there. You search your hard drive and import the respective file. So this is normal template structuring of the .h and .m. Now let's move to the syntax now of Objective-C. Now whenever you want to learn anything, I would say a new language, and in a new language you have to understand the syntax. There are only two things you have to understand. One, how to declare a method. Second, how to call the method. Declaration and definition are same because we have open braces, closed braces for the definition. So we're gonna see first how we do in other language, and then same declaration we'll see in Objective-C. So in other language, suppose I want a method called int get model number. It's a method without parenthesis, and a second method which will demonstrate will be a method which contains parameters, okay, without argument, and suppose you want to call it, so you're going to say int a equal to, suppose v1 is an object, v1 dot get model number. So this is how you declare in other language. In Objective-C, the same thing will be declared differently. You want to say there will be plus or minus before the return type. Now significance we will see after we are done with the syntax. All your return type or the parameter type of the method will be in parenthesis, get model number, and no parenthesis after the method name. Complicated, right? But we have to do it. It's a syntax. So plus or minus, you don't know the significance, but either plus or the minus sign needs to be there. Within the parenthesis, you're gonna put all your data types, and there is no parenthesis after the method name. Now, if you want to call this method, you need to use square bracket space. There is no dot operator to call a method, so dot operator is not used to call the method, and square bracket close. So this is the way we call the. It's very complicated. What is a wow factor? Priyank, you always tell Apple has a wow factor. What is this? Right now, nothing. Now let's see the second example. So I say I want to say create vehicle. It passed two arguments, say int model num comma string name. In other language, in Java you won't be using pointer, and you will be calling something like this: v1 dot create vehicle 1 comma xyz. This is the way we will call the method. The same thing in Objective-C is written plus or minus sign, we don't know the significance, void create vehicle colon. Now the parameter list starts with using a colon. In the type model num space, there is no comma, space and a string star name. Oh my god, so complicated. So there is no parenthesis after for the function name. The argument list are separated by colon type name, colon type name without comma. Now if you want to call this, you're going to say v1 space create vehicle colon 1 colon @ double quote x y z. Now in other language, strings are denoted by using double quote, but here the NS strings are denoted by @ double quote. Now why? Because Objective-C is built on the C language. So there are a lot many C based library which you will be using in your code. There will be nesting of C function inside the Objective-C methods, or Objective-C method are nested inside the C call. So there is a constant car, right, which we get C string. So how to distinguish between the C string and the NS string? NS string comes from the Objective-C background. So that's why they put the @ so that two data structures can be distinguished. So when you have double quote, it's a C string. When you have double quote, it indicates it is an it's an objective C string. Clear? So difference between the constant car and the NS string is denoted by the . Now it's very complicated. What is a wow factor? Now this is not called best practice of declaring. We'll see how to declare the method using a best practice. Now before that, just concentrate on this particular. I'll just increase the font for this particular line. Create vehicle. Now suppose when I say we always keep on saying best practice, use best practice, use. The best practice means making your code more readable to the audience or to the person. It takes lesser time for other person to understand your code. That means best practice, right? No one in this world knows the entire programming library. We just get trained for the basic life concepts. Once we understand that, we never go for the API related things to anyone. We just see the .h file of the library and we come to know. Now when you see this line v1.create vehicle in your code, you will understand what one indicates and what xyz indicates. You have to go to declaration and there you find, oh, one indicates the model number and name indicates the. Some people say the best practice is that you can within a function name or the method name, you put your argument list like set origin xy. So first parameter is x, second is y. In this case, the best would be create vehicle with model number underscore name. Okay, for one parameter or two parameter is fine. Suppose your function takes 10 parameters, then your method name will become complicated to understand, right? Now, with the best practice, you can declare the Objective-C is a language which allows you to label each argument. You can label all your argument with a key value pair, and that makes it wow factor. So with the best practice, the same method would have been written this way: void create vehicle with model number int name colon and string star name. So before the colon, left hand side of colon, you can label your argument. So your first function name, the function name gets divided into key value pair. So there is no space between the vehicle and the width. Okay. So in order to make a continuation, we make, so this acts as the first label to your model number. This acts as the second label to your parameter. And same thing, if you call, you say v1 create vehicle with now this makes it more clear to a person who reads it. Now when you read this line, you come to know, okay, vehicle is getting created using a model number 1 and name xyz. Now this is called a wow factor. So this is what we call a wow factor. So this is called best practice of declaring the methods in the Objective-C. Every argument should have, so by default your first label is a function name itself. So your function name is create vehicle with model number name. This signature and this signature are two different signatures. So if you declare this way, you have to call this way. If you declare this way, you have to call this way. So we always prefer to use this syntax. Now this is called a wow factor. So even your method takes 10 arguments, you don't have to worry about it. Each argument will have a label, so it becomes easier. Now let's go to significance of the plus and minus. Now you have heard about static methods and instance method, right? So for right now, I don't want to go in more complication. Okay, so a compiler creates some object which are called meta objects, which are called class object. Now these are the class object which are responsible for creating an instance during the runtime. So for vehicle as an object will be getting created, okay, by the compiler. It's called class object, and this vehicle object is class object is the responsible for creating the instance called v1 during the runtime. So there are methods associated with the class which we call static method. Static methods are always called using a class name. Now here the class method, you can relate them as a static method. Class object main responsibility is to create the instances during the runtime. Now whenever there is a plus sign, it indicates it's a class method, or you can write for time being, you can say they are static method. Class will be responsible. Minus indicates it's a instance method. Clear? So significance of plus is static and non-static. Right now there is more difference between the class method. I don't want to go in theory. When there are a lot many practical examples which we want to see in a tutorial, where we want to see significance of plus more prominent in respect to the Objective-C. So now before we move to the most important part of the Objective-C theory, we'll see how constructor and destructor works out here. So here, if you suppose you want to create a vehicle in normal, say Java, I would have written this new vehicle. So this acts as a constructor which can. Now same thing, if you want to declare it in the Objective-C, I would have declared v1 equal to vehicle alloc, and then there would be a nesting init. So this vehicle alloc is act as a new operator only. It allocates the space. The alloc is declared in NS object, okay, which is responsible allocating the space, and it produces the instance, and that instance is initialized. So init acts as a constructor and to give you the v1. Now we cannot use vehicle variable because here the system can distinguish between the class object and the constructor with this parenthesis. We don't have a concept of parenthesis in the Objective-C. Therefore the term init is used as an initializer. Now, so NS object will have at least one class method with plus sign which returns ID and alloc. Now ID is an Objective-C data type, you can say. ID means void pointer, NS object type. So whenever it returns an ID, anyone returns the ID, any method returns the ID, it means it can return any damn an Objective-C object. Or if what do you call, a method takes ID as an argument, you can say it can take any Objective-C object as an argument. So ID enables you to design the factory pattern in your application. Now there will be at least one instance method called init. Now in other languages, if you see, constructor are always returning void, whereas in Objective-C constructor returns the object. There's a very good debatable question when it comes to why the constructor in Objective-C returns the pointer, because if you see, when allocation happens, the pointer is already initialized. It's an instance method, right? Now in Objective-C, if I have a call get model number, okay, it would have executed it after the alloc. But if I write after new operator, if I write v1 dot, it will say the object is not initialized and it will crash. So alloc internally allocate the space and also initialize it, but we use init to give that programming homogeneity, and also init helps you to initialize a superclass, easier relationship, and if there's some issue you can return the subsequent object. So typical constructor will be this way. Self is like a this pointer. In other class we use this, other language we use this, here we use self. We call super constructor super init. If self is created, we want to say initialize the and then you say return. If suppose at this level ESA goes fail and it won't, so in else you can create a subsequent object and return that object to the init. So this is the way we have alloc init created. So I always follow this way. I call alloc and then I call init, so it becomes homogeneous like new and constructor name. Okay, So always if you have allocator, you have to have id as a return type. It's basically an address of the pointer. Okay, init will always have minus sign with id. Okay, so this is the way the constructor and destructor, or I would say a constructor are created and objects are created. Now this is what we have done with the Objective C class patterns. Whatever we see, how we saw how Xcode creates .h and .m, right? .h, all variables are declared within the parentheses, methods are declared here, and in Objective C syntax are different. Okay, normal language you have parentheses, we don't have parentheses. We call without using dot operator within a square bracket. We saw the best practice. It's the only language that allows you to label the argument, which makes it wow. And then we saw significance of plus and minus sign, which we have to write before the return type of the method. Plus indicates class method, minus indicates instance method. Then we saw alloc init significance. Alloc is an allocator, init is a constructor initializer, has an id as a return type, which is a Objective C type. You can say NS object type or void pointer in different other cases. Now, the next exercise which we will see is the most important concept called properties. If you have understood properties in Objective C, you have understood the memory management inside the Objective C. And the same concept applies in Java, C++. So if you want to get into the memory management, you have to know properties very, very well. Okay, so we're going to see the second exercise called Objective C properties.